Everyone, so I'm Vidya Tiku. I'm the director for Greater Boston with the trustees. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to take a minute to make sure that you people are also introduced to each other. So if you want to introduce yourselves in the chat window, please go ahead and do so. Maybe a name, and if you're with an organization in Easton, or if you're an abutter or a neighbor, that would be great. And we will be sharing, contacts if anybody needs them at the end of the meeting. I want to make sure we introduce ourselves. My team here, maybe Dennis, you could start us off, introduce yourself, and then Peter, Fran, and we'll go from there.
Hi, I'm Dennis Camp. I'm the stewardship manager for the Greater Boston area with the trustees.
Hey folks, my name is Peter Bound. I am an engagement manager and a visitor services manager in Boston and at the Bradley Estate, and I actually live on Elm Street.
Everybody, I'm Fran Blanchard. I'm the director of the stewardship program. So stewardship is property care at the trustees. And I also want to introduce not trustees employees, but trusted partners. Sevi Strekalovsky from Strekalovsky Architecture, and Mark Laughlin is here too. And they're going to help with our presentation tonight. They're helping us with the design for this project, and they can answer questions too.
Thanks, Fran, and welcome, Sevi, and welcome, Mark. Great to have you guys here today.
Nice to be.
I want to make sure that everybody's aware that only the first of our 2 community meetings that we're having for the Ames renovation updates. We will also have a second opportunity on site in person if anybody wants to come on Ames Estate and meet with us and go through the design strategy in place right now. That meeting will be this Saturday at 10 a.m. And if you can help spread the word, that would be great. I know we have about 10 people signed up. It would be great to have some more folks. So what I want to set the goals for the meeting today. The Ames Estate is a complex property. For today's purposes, we will basically be going over the most recent efforts made by the trustees for the care of this property, and share our current strategy for the demolition of the main house while planning for a new gathering space for our visitors and neighbors that best leverages the beauty and the vistas and the landscape at the Ames Estate. As you know, this is a 36-acre property that was once home to our 35th Governor Oliver Ames. It sits in the heart of the cultural district of the Northeastern community, and we are delighted that so many of our partners are here today to help us weigh in and help us plan on how to best activate and move forward at this property. So with that, I should say we will please hold your questions, but go ahead and put them in the chat, and we will take the questions at the end. We'll make sure there's enough time to cover all the inquiries. So with that, can I turn this over to you, Fran, if everybody else can mute themselves? And Fran, go ahead and share your screen.
Can you all see that?
Beautiful.
Awesome. Yeah, Ames is a pretty place. So I think this is a little bit of the site plan just to try and get us oriented to the property. The trustees acquired the property almost 10 years ago, working with the Ames family and the town. So really an awesome partnership with Easton to be able to do this. And you can see there's pretty significant features on the site. So I'll talk a little bit about our stewardship and how we think about this property and how we think about caring for significant resources on the property. And then I'll talk a little bit about future plans and sort of where we've landed here. So in terms of the stewardship at Ames, it's 35 managed acres. So that's actually the entire envelope of the property. So trustees, we own several other properties in Massachusetts, but most of them are not all managed acres, right? And the entire landscape at Ames is pretty significant to us. So we call it a designed landscape. And that means we have certain obligations to manage the features in the landscape and the character of the landscape in the way that we approach it. In addition to that 35 managed acres, we also have 13 acres of what we call living collections. So a living collection is where the genetic identity of the plant itself is significant and meaningful. So we want to be able to track what we have so that it can be replaced, because the diversity of that collection is really meaningful. So 13 acres of living collections is important to us at Ames. And we also have 5 buildings, including the tenant house. We also have the main house, the carriage house or the stable, the head house, which is this building that was attached to a greenhouse. And there's a shed on the property for storage for equipment. So obviously there's a lot of resources at Ames, and one of the ways that we try and really approach stewardship at the trustees is to be really focused on what we call character defining features. So those parts of the property that really, if they were lost, it would change how people feel about Ames or how Ames is experienced. So we work with the cultural resources staff at the trustees organization, and we help map out what that looks like for us. So in terms of character defining features at Ames, we think about the studio, building the carriage house, so that stable building, the specimen trees, so all those living collections where we really care about the landscape in that way. And then also the view sheds. So in particular, the views across Shovel Shop Pond and across to Crystal Lake. So that's sort of what we think about when we think about what an experience at Ames feels like. So just a little bit of background. Oh, sorry, everybody. Background on property activation. We acquired a property back close to 2013, and at that time we added parking. We put in some pathways and picnic area, and also Dennis built some picnic tables with his team at the time. Since then, we've replaced the roofs on the studio, so that's that head house building. Also, the stable has had a roof replacement, and we've also done some interior improvements at that studio building. And then if you were on site last summer, you know we had Arbor Day there, so we did a bunch of tree work, including pretty significant tree removal, but also tree replacement. And then we've also done some tree identification mapping. And we've instituted a plant healthcare program for the specimen trees on the property. So in terms of how we think about how we have moved this forward, we did a needs assessment at Ames in terms of the activation of the property. And we determined we need really a flexible gathering space. So the idea for that space is to use it for public programming, for events and gatherings, and passive recreation. So we want to be able to build something that can be used by people that are walking through the property on a daily basis, but also will help support when we have programs or when we do gatherings. We also think bathrooms are a pretty important part of the property. So we're hoping to add bathrooms for passive recreation, but also for any programs or events we would have. We want to improve the landscape elements around this event space, and also put in lawn or hardened surface with some flexibility, so supports sort of gathering and foot traffic. And then a covered space so that we can address shade and weather impacts. And part of this is, you know, the trustees over the last 8 years has really upped our programming across the state. And these are some of the things that we know work really well in terms of the other properties that we manage and where we have public programs on other sites. So as part of this effort at Ames, we did this needs assessment to say, here's what we're looking for that will help us activate the property to the public and do a better job with engaging people there. And so we have a bunch of different ways to solve this problem at Ames. And over the last couple of years, we have been working to explore them. The first initiative was really looking at, well, could we invest in the main house itself and convert it to meet the needs of the gathering space? It's actually really challenging to do that. We found that the interior of the building, the rooms are pretty small in terms of meeting the fire code for gathering spaces. You need 20 square feet per person, and there's not sufficient room, or the rooms in the house itself are just not big enough to be able to accommodate that. And in addition, this is pretty expensive infrastructure to maintain. The building is pretty expensive to heat and own over time. So we started looking at options for what if we didn't need this house and we could get a big open space outside, which is what we do. But we wouldn't wanted to think about leaving the bathrooms for people and leaving some of the infrastructure there. So we considered removing the main house altogether and leaving the 1990s addition on the end of it for restrooms. And when we mapped that out, we found that there were some real challenges in terms of costs and in terms of adaptability and also just accessibility, right? So if you want to put in public restrooms, obviously all of the people that come to Ames need to be able to get to them. And you can see there's stairs up into this building, and just adjusting this plan for accessibility turned out to be more complicated than we had hoped. So we also considered the option of removing the main house altogether and investing in the project dollars in the carriage house. That's the historic building on the property that is really culturally significant to the site. It's a character defining feature on the site, and it's appealing to us to think of just investing in those features of the property that really make Ames what it is. So we continued, right, with this alternatives analysis. And in addition to thinking about, so we've got the house, we've got no house, we've got the cube, we've got no cube, then we thought maybe we should add a pavilion. Maybe that would be a good idea, adding an open air pavilion. And we vetted that out through a student design competition, working with an architect out of Marion. And that ended up not being preferable in terms of like cost to own and maintain, but also just not a compelling design for the space. And then we thought about adding an event tent. So this is something we've been trying at some of our other properties. We use a 3-season event tent at places like Long Hill and Castle Hill. And that tent is great for when we have public programs and people need a gathering space, but it is also accessible for anybody just walking to the property that day. So we sort of got a little bit hung up in this process of just too many options and too many decisions to sort of go through. And you can see from this drawing that we decided we would hire some help. So we engaged Sevi Strekalowski, who's helped us in a couple of other projects, and his colleague Mark, to sort of do some alternatives analysis for us and really give us some professional advice on cost implications, but also just view sheds and the best use of the space. So I think the next couple of slides are for Sevi to take us through. I can advance the slides if you let me know when you're ready, Sevi.
Okay. Yeah, this was a very first response when we visited with Fran and Bob Murray on the site, and just to look at how the tent and the carriage house might work together. At that time, we hadn't really investigated the possibilities of renovating and making accessible the carriage house in a way that would be historically acceptable to the town and to the abutters and the users and the trustees. So it's very preliminary, and we should really move on from that. But it does show the first impression. Now the scheme A, which is the decision to enhance the site and develop sustainability is to remove the main house as well as its 1990s addition. And the beauty of that is that it creates a relationship with this open tent, which is not that permanent a structure. It makes a 360-degree view of the landscape, which I don't have to tell most of you is in the Olmstedian English tradition that he really originated with Capability Brown and clumping, creating vistas, creating clumps of trees, and a rolling landscape. And Olmsted continued that tradition in many places in this country. But what we like about this is that it's actually a relationship between an historic building and a contemporary addition for a certain function, which is clearly a complementary relationship. It's one that the National Park Service views as a goal in doing, adding components and additions to buildings. They like to see what's new and what's old. And the beauty of this scheme is that from that platform where the tent would be, you see 360 degrees. You see the pond, which you would not see if there were 3 building elements here. And so and 3 buildings is kind of confuses what's historic, what's the relationship between the buildings, even though we studied making a quite a nice little house, nice little building out of the cube addition. It really wasn't relevant historically, or it didn't help either the views or the connection to these existing, the existing historic structure and the proposed new one. So this, the colored area shows about half the carriage house in a way that we would utilize existing door openings, so there wouldn't be any change from the character of the building envelope. And we'd have 2 accessible toilets that would be allow access to them, but not to the rest of the building. And then we'd have the possibility of having receptions, utilizing what's a very nice function room. You could have board meetings there infrequently, but just a closed space that would have quite a bit of character to it. And in the future, have that wonderful barn stall section of the building, which could be renovated. But what we would be doing is bringing it up to code in terms of accessibility. Structurally, there are some issues with bringing the public into a building that's been just a barn. So we'd be analyzing it structurally, mechanically. And really, this building is sustainable. The cube, any of the other buildings are not on site. So the masonry is in quite good shape. The roof is, all of this is something which deserves investment and could be sustained by it.
So with Sevi's help, we came up with this idea that we would do a custom design 3-season tent. This image is an example of one of the tents that the company that we like has made. You can see this involves removing the house in its entirety, moving the restrooms to the carriage house, and improving the landscape around the tent. And I think Savvy spoke to these things, but I think for us, it allows us to really invest in the character defining features of the property. It's providing support for visitor amenities and making it easier and more comfortable for people when they go to Ames, but without really significantly increasing our operating costs. And it allows, right, the views. And we sort of think that house is really on the prime real estate of the property. So we think having people gather there just makes sense. So in terms of the process for this project, so we started working on the concept design last fall and through this winter. We're in this moment where we're getting some stakeholder input in terms of what are our current uses and future program goals and what else could we be doing at Ames. The idea is we love to be able to finalize design after the stakeholder process and do some construction documentation. Ideally, we would go through permitting this spring and summer, and ideally we would be under construction in the fall. I think it's a somewhat ambitious timeline, but we're gamers. That's how we do it. So Vidya, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, and we also want to use this opportunity today to talk through how you all currently engage with the property, and what are the kinds of programs that you want to see here in the future. I think the flexibility that the tent offers us is really incredible. We were thinking of sample programs that we are doing on other properties. We do, walks and talks about trees or the stars. We definitely want to partner with some of the nonprofits that are, here in the room today, and others. We don't want to replicate what exists, but only really partner and offer up, what's missing from the menu in Northeastern. We have done a number of program partnerships at the Ames Estate, most prominently the Legacy Festival with the Cultural District and the Fishing Derby that Ed does here with the Lions Club. We've done concerts at other properties. We've done beer gardens where a lot of young families come out. We've done seasonal celebrations, Halloween, Easter. Currently we're in the middle of fire pit seasons where a lot of people come out and, book their private fire pit and are having some fun with families and friends. We anticipate that we could also do private rentals for family celebrations, so birthdays, engagements, while making sure that, we maintain a menu that is respectful of the neighbors and, their privacy. So, but, everything's on the table, and I think as we move into the discussion, we would love to hear more about that. So I think, Fran, maybe we can just transition into the Q&A next. So if you could stop sharing the screen. And if folks want to raise their hands or, feel free to unmute yourselves, and we can get your thoughts, feedback, questions. We have another half an hour to do so today.
I'll start. This is Stephanie. So when you're thinking about programming, are you thinking that this will be a combination of trustees organized and delivered programming as well as programming from the community at large?
Absolutely, yes. I think one of the advantages of having this tent is because it's so flexible, it really can host a really wide, menu of events for the community.
And I guess another question I would have is, have you thought about how you would engage with the community to bring that programming from outside of the trustees organization?
Yeah, so I just 2 days ago, I was yet again speaking with Dottie, who's heading the cultural district in the interim.
Mm-hmm.
And Also spoke with the Ames family, you know, the family that has grown up here with Fran just yesterday. And trying to identify how best to position the Ames estate as the cultural district in Easton, and how do you make those connections so that we can elevate, you know, how amazing and how gorgeous this area is. So when we say walks and talks, we were actually thinking maybe that can be something that you know, different organizations can combine together and have, you know, a larger Eastern walk, which can become a signature event, you know, from year to year. We definitely have the Children's Museum, we have the Ames Free Library. We have been talking with them, the Oaks Hall folks, and just trying, you know, welcoming folks to brainstorm with us, see what they want to do. So, but nothing's, you know, we don't have like a, here's what we're gonna do. So I think this will be
Mhm.
an evolving process. And as we hear from folks and as we can come up with more and more partnerships, that's what we're looking for here.
Yeah. You know, just from my experience in my own community, we can think of lots of great ideas. I mean, you know, movies under the stars. I was thinking educational programs kind of tying in as you're talking about Vidya, the whole cultural district, the history of the shovel works, and, you know, the architectural assets that the town benefits from. That all takes coordination and manpower to make it happen and pull it together.
Yes, and that is absolutely the hope here. Yeah. Thank you for that, Stephanie. Yes, that's very important. Anybody else who wants to go next? I know you guys have questions. Don't hold back.
Don't hold back.
Yes, Deb. And
I'm Steve.
hi, Steve.
I'm not sure, but I believe this is a registered historical site. Is that correct? Okay. So what are the ramifications involved as far as deconstruction, as far as demolishing the building and then reconstructing other structures on it? Are there state or federal funds available that would aid in the process, or no?
Fran, you want to take that?
Sure. Ames does have cultural resources. The entire property is not necessarily, it's not like a registered historic landmark or anything like that. And the trustees is, right, we're a nonprofit organization, but we are privately funded. So most of the time for the projects that we do, we need to make sure that we have resources to address them. So, the permitting process for removing a building, there's an internal trustees process that we go through. So we have governance committees at the trustees, like our cultural resources committee, that are real experts in cultural resources, and our board members and our executive team on these internal committees first need to sign off and say, yes, okay, yeah, we understand with all the resources we manage, it's okay to remove this building. So that happens internally. And then we need to work with the town. So this building will have to be permitted through the historic district, also through the building inspector, and then this project will have site plan review also. So there will be a number of permitting processes through the town of Easton that we'll work through to get permission to remove this. And then there's also some pretty clear guidelines around demolition of buildings and the extent of the materials that need to be recycled. So we follow best practices according to any of those buildings guidelines that we need to work through. So that's part of how we do this work. It's possible that there would be a future grant application to support some portion of the scope of work for this project. That's always something that we try and do. Obviously, we have to do fundraising as a nonprofit organization, and looking for grant opportunities to fund some of this work is a big part of that. But as part of when we acquire a property, we do a fundraising campaign, and there is still some money from that initial fundraising campaign at Ames to address some of this work. So
I'll take a comment from the chat room from Ruth. She says, I love the direction you have taken in removing the house, but keeping the historic carriage house and expanding its uses. I also love the way the tent will allow for uninterrupted views of the site. The tent is gorgeous. And Ruth clearly knows as well. She's asking, how much will it cost? How much will it cost to take the tent down every year? What are the plans for the landscape around the tent?
So the infrastructure of the tent, the tent is handmade, and the posts are, they're actually mahogany posts that are made from mahogany that is sustainably grown in Africa. So it's not harvested from the rainforest. It comes from a farm where the mahogany is farmed. So the tent structure and frame stays up. The canvas cover comes off annually. And it gets cleaned and stored, and then we put it back up in the spring. But we have some governance members at the trustees that are really fixated on like the views in this part of the property and making sure that we don't have just a metal tent or anything unattractive in that spot. So that's part of what went into picking this particular tent design.
And Fran, anything you can add about the landscape that we need to the tent, or Sevi or Mark?
I think the plan for the landscape is to keep it pretty clean, because we don't want to disrupt the views. So I think it's mostly grading and elevations to really feather the landscape up to where that grade is and make sure that it's accessible and walkable, and that we do some complementary plantings, but probably more specimen trees and not flower gardens.
And I can add that we do have some funding in the coming year to continue our tree work, which is, thanks to a generous gift again from an anonymous donor. So you will see some more trees going in hopefully soon.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thoughts, questions? Do you see your organizations at this estate using it, or if you're in a butter, do you see yourselves using this space? I don't know. I feel like did everybody just have dinner? This is a very friendly crowd.
Or not have dinner.
Or not have dinner, exactly, yeah.
We are on the property practically every day. We walk our dog there, and we walk around and enjoy it. We've gone to some of the events there and absolutely love it. And sometimes progress is difficult and it's challenging, but this looks like a good plan and sustainable. And I think, it is practical. And so kudos for that.
Thank you. Yeah,
I think
it took us a few years, but.
in answer to your question, Vidya, I think one of the questions I would have, you mentioned, okay, I'm sorry, that the carriage house would have like meeting room space that would be available. Would that be available to the public to book and use?
Yes, for sure.
Even after, even like after hours, or?
Yeah, we're trying for that as well for after hours. I think some of it will depend on the level of staffing I'm able to secure.
Yeah.
but our intention and effort will be to do so. It is actually a beautiful room for those who have seen the inside. And actually, we were talking to the Ames siblings last afternoon, and they were also very keen to preserve the nature of that space. They were sharing memories of growing up there and having family dinners and school reunions, the high school there. So it is a very gorgeous space, and I hope everybody uses it. So there's a question in the chat from Donna. We don't live in Northeastern, but do go there to walk frequently. This plan looks good to us. Wondering when will the specimen trees be labeled?
Mhm.
I don't know if Fran, you can answer that, but we do. I can get back to you on that. We have Cindy, who's our Director of Horticulture and Cultural Landscapes, that has been working on that. I don't know, Fran, if you have any updates from her.
So we do have a plan to do some labeling for the trees this summer, although it's not the labeling that you might think. Part of managing a living collection is we use GIS data, so we geolocate every plant on the property, and then we tie a name in the genetic species of that plant. So, right, we don't just go gene and species, but we also want to know the cultivar, and we want to know where it came from and who gave it to the family or who planted it. So it's a little bit of work and to really understand the history of these plants. And so usually we hire a specialist horticulturist to help us with this. So we have resources to do that work this summer. And then the first step of this is to get all of that information and the geolocations of all the significant plants into a database. Because what happens is if you go to all the trouble of labeling your trees, the labels fall off and then you have to start all over again. So sometimes there's a delay between when we actually get all the physical GIS data for every plant and then actually put the labels on. But we are doing the technical part of this next summer, so probably another year out for the labels.
Thanks, Fran.
There's a fairly significant amount of stonework that is part of the main house. I wonder if is any of that going to be recycled in the design at all, or do you not know yet?
Yeah.
So the patio pavers in the back are promised to the Ames family. So they are gonna come get them, I guess, maybe Dennis. But so those we won't be able to reuse them. But if there are other elements of the house that we can use that make sense in the design, we certainly will.
I'd like to ask a question, if I may, please. This is Linda Thompson-Clem from the Garden Club. I think at the moment, many gardeners are very interested in native species being planted. Obviously, you're probably not that far. You're not that far away, not that far along in the process yet. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is, if help is needed somewhere down in the process to make sure that we're encouraging native species and pollinators and habitats for birds and other little critters, the Garden Club would love to be involved.
That's great to hear, Linda. Thank you for offering that support.
No
we
problem.
are obviously big fans. We actually have a little, very tiny nursery down in Mattapan in Boston for that just works with native plants. I mean, we're low on capacity, but yes, I would love for you to be involved and the Garden Club to join us. We have really strong partnerships with garden clubs in other towns. A lot of them actually lead the programs or invite their constituencies, for walks and talks. And we have good connections, I would say, through the organization as a whole with significant speakers. So we could look at speaker series. You know, again, I share all this with the hope that I have staffing to support all of this.
Of course.
That is the goal for sure.
Of course.
But, you know, even if not, like we can, you know, I would love to pursue like a volunteer network here and activate this property as much as we can, for sure.
Thank you.
But thank you for offering that, Linda. I'll take you up on it.
Okay.
Anybody else? We have
Sounds-
second.
Well, it sounds exciting and a little daunting, but I remember years ago when it was talked about tearing it down and wondering whether or not the roof would be hard to get rid of because it needed reshingling and so forth. So the talk in the old days was the cost of keeping that building there. And I'm so happy that we're going to do something so that everyone can see the views of what reminds me of Courier and Ives roads. It's just incredible, just wonderful.
Victoria, yes, I agree. I think there are very few properties, even within the, there are very few properties that really do have the kind of living collection and the vistas that Ames does. Anyone else? We will have a second meeting Saturday, like I said, at 10 o'clock. We do have representation. I think Dottie may join, as well as a couple of folks from the Historic Commission. So we should get some ears and eyes from them. And you are all, of course, also very welcome to come again and actually, you know, think of this and envision the site with us there. If folks don't have any other comments, I don't want to hold your night and can give you 15 minutes of your life back right now.
Could you give us that date again on
Yeah, when is it
Saturday?
again, please?
It's this
The date?
Saturday, which would be the 5th at 10 a.m. And we'll gather up in the driveway right in front of the main house and the carriage shop.
Wonderful.
Great.
Weather looks good right now. It should be a nice sunny day. So, all right, folks. So I think that probably is it. Please, I will put in my email in the chat really quickly. So please don't hesitate to reach out anytime if you have any questions or thoughts or suggestions. And we will look forward to partnering up with all of you guys soon. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night and hopefully
Thank you.
Saturday.
Good night.
Thank you. Yeah.
Night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.